Morning, and thanks for joining us today. I'm Julie McCarthy, and I'm a Senior Program Officer with the NYHealth Foundation. Before we get started, a few housekeeping notes. We'll be recording this webinar, and a recap with the link to the recording and to other materials that are mentioned here today will be shared afterwards. Video and audio are disabled for attendees, but we invite you to use the chat box throughout the webinar to ask events and to share ideas. And finally, we have closed captioning that's available for those of you who'd like to use that feature. So you can click to find it in the top right center. So just want to say thanks to everyone for joining us today on this discussion of how farm to school and healthy school meals for all efforts can support each other. As I'm sure most of you know, many states have been implementing farm to school programming for several decades now. Here in New York, we have a small competitive grants program. We have a reimbursement for meals that include a certain percentage of local foods, and we have regional coordinators who work with local producers. Whether it's through funding the purchase of local foods, supporting food service training, or embedding experts within state agencies to coordinate activities, really all farm to school activities aim to increase purchase of local products and improve the quality of schools that students eat, improve the quality of meals that students eat, excuse me. But in contrast, healthy school meals for all efforts are relatively new. There's a handful of states that have passed policies to make school meals free for all students. And those policies are really getting considerable attention for their potential to increase access to meals for students nationwide. But with any new program, there comes some uncertainty, right? There also comes opportunity. And advocates for farm to school may be worried that these new policies could attract attention away from longstanding successful child nutrition programs, while others are really excited that new funding to school meals could ultimately free up local dollars to increase local purchasing. So here to discuss sort of this balance of uncertainty and also opportunity today, we have three experts. I'm honored to be joined by Michaela Perry. So Michaela is the New York Policy Manager for the American Farmland Trust, where she leads two statewide coalitions. She works closely with state policymakers to advocate for programs that permanently protect farmland, that increase access for new and beginning farmers, that advance climate justice, and that support farm to school programs. I have two fun facts about her, that Michaela is a fifth generation farmer herself, and she's worked in farm-based education, agriculture, and policy in 3 countries, 4 states, and in 3 languages. She holds a BA in political science and an MA in food studies, and she's also a professional oil painter, and her work has been shown up and down the East Coast. So thank you for Michaela for joining us. We're also joined by Krista Hesdorfer. Krista serves as the Director of Public Affairs at Hunger Solutions New York. It's a statewide nonprofit that focuses on maximizing federal nutrition assistance programs, including SNAP, WIC, school meals, summer EBT, and the Child and Adult Care Food Program. Krista oversees the organization's policy and advocacy agendas and co-leads the Healthy School Meals for All New York Kids Coalition, which is a group of nearly 290 organizations that are advocating for New York to provide school breakfast and lunch at no cost to all students statewide. And finally, we are joined by Cassandra Bull. Cassandra is a policy specialist at the National Farm to School Network. And she's been, while she was working on a small farm in Western New York, she saw the value of connecting institutional food to rural food systems and developed a countywide farm to school program through Cornell Cooperative Extension. She expanded this work to evaluate New York's local food purchasing incentive policy, the 30% New York State Initiative, which we're going to talk about today, and continued to research similar incentives across the nation during her graduate work at Tufts University. At the National Farm to School Network, Cassandra supports state-level policy through a national lens and has a specific focus on racial equity and values-based purchasing. And her expertise is in incentives, school meals for all, and the relationship between those two policies. So the perfect conduit to connect both of these. I'm going to start with you, Michaela. When we were planning this event, we were talking a lot about the release of your new report that looks at the state of New York's farm to school program. And you're in the middle of a big push to educate state policymakers on the ways that the program needs to be strengthened. And yet, when I said, how should we organize it? Who should be on it? You said any event that, any discussion of farm to school right now also has to involve a discussion of healthy school meals for all. And I just wanted to start with that question. Can you explain that to us?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here. We have had a farm to school program, the reimbursement incentive program, and the grants program in New York State since 2018. And so it's been, a few years. We know what's working, we know what's not. And I think, the coalition New York Grown Food for New York Kids, we're fairly protective of our farm to school program, and we know what we would like to see changed. But Healthy School Meals for All, that campaign did an incredible job last year with their comms, with coalition building, and many of our coalition members were also on the Healthy School Meals for All coalition. And there was just a lot of opportunity for cross collaboration. To be transparent, I was worried as the leader of a separate coalition for farm to school that we would get buried by this very large coalition that was doing an incredible job in Albany. And so I was hesitant to join coalitions, even though there were those opportunities for cross collaboration. A lot of legislators were saying to me in Albany, because they had been, longtime supporters of the 30% farm to school program, that they were worried that these two bills were competing. And Hunger Solutions and myself, we were in Albany saying, no, they're not competing bills. They work together, but we didn't yet exactly know how. And we got our answer last year. So there was a language issue that directly impacted the 30% program. And at that point, we realized we do have to be working more closely together. So our coalitions haven't joined together as one, and we likely won't, but given that there's a lot of collaboration, we do need to be working side by side because we don't see these as competing bills. We know that students need access to meals. We know that a lot of the time, students, especially in New York State, in both urban and rural areas and suburban areas, their school meals are the only meals they might be getting that day. So we know that they need access to these meals. And if we provide that access, if we lift the burden of budgeting for these meals and figuring out how to pay for these meals from schools, then schools and food service directors will also have more bandwidth to say, how can we make these meals healthier or more local? Or wouldn't it be fun to collaborate with our local farmer who has this product available? And we really want to open up that space for schools to get creative and serve their unique population of students, and also just get local healthy food to kids.
Great. Thanks so much, Michaela. I mean, I think something you said, which feels so important and really highlight this before turning to Krista, is that people saw these as competing, and that certainly was a worry for you, right? Because you've had longstanding success from a policy perspective of having, legislator support farm to school programming, but you could get buried. And so Krista, you're one of the leaders of the Healthy School Meals campaign, Healthy School Meals for All campaign here in New York State. You had a huge win last year, securing $135 million to help more schools provide free meals just to all students. I'm wondering, what was your incentive to work with the Farm to School Coalition?
Thanks, Julia. So Hunger Solutions New York, as an organization, we've been involved in farm to school work since AFT first launched the New York Grown Food for New York Kids Coalition. So we are longstanding partners on that side. And for us, it's a really natural fit and in alignment with our mission. We focus primarily on expanding access to and participation in school meals. That work, then combined with farm to school, helps ensure that all kids, but especially kids from low-income households, have access to fresh, local, healthy food that they need to thrive in the classroom and beyond. So that alignment was always in our wheelhouse. But it was also really important for the success of our advocacy for universal school meals. We did have a significant victory last year, but we're not done. And we know that we need to cultivate widespread support and push back on some of these narratives that the policies are competing with one another. So we have done a lot of education together with Michaela, with Cassandra, and with other partners to show lawmakers that a universal school meal policy builds capacity for farm to school, and farm to school helps improve meal quality and is a complement then to universal school meal policies. So really working to debunk those misperceptions, some of the stereotypes around school meal quality, and making those connections helps to bolster support for both issue areas. Michaela mentioned being concerned that their ask might be buried. We're concerned, right, that lawmakers might say, well, we're going to do one thing on school meals this year, and it's going to be fixing this language on the farm to school policy, and we're going to move on after that. So it's really in everybody's interest to work together and make sure that lawmakers know you cannot pit these policies against each other. It's not one or the other. You need to fund both of these things in order to support schools, students, families, and of course, farmers across the state.
Thanks so much, Krista. So naturally, as someone who works at the New York Health Foundation, I think that the work that Farm to School and Healthy School Meals for All have done in our state is remarkable. But I only know New York well. And so, Cassandra, you work at the national level. You're working across states on both of these policies. And can you just help us understand to what degree advocates in other states are working together and how they're reconciling this sort of like this stated tension between the two campaigns that they could be competing?
Yeah, thanks for having me to share a national perspective. So the short answer is that it's actually pretty common for advocates to combine these two narratives, or at least it has been so far with successful campaigns. So National Farm to School Network, we believe in expanding school meal access, but we don't want to continue the status quo of school food. So as we've heard in the last two answers, we believe that school meal policies can do even more. They can transform the food system if they're paired with the right policies that support local food purchasing, scratch cooking, values-aligned purchasing, labor, and other things like that. I guess to bring it back in 2022, my colleagues noticed that a lot of the states that had successful school meals campaigns were really strong in farm to school. So we were looking at this correlation, and now in 2024, we can see that that correlation is loud and clear, that all 8 states with permanent school meals for all policies have strong farm to school policies in place, whether that's a grant program, coordinators, or an incentive program. It's all there loud and clear. 7 of the 8 states with permanent policies for school meals for all have local food purchasing incentives. And the 8th state, Massachusetts, has a bill that's working its way through the House right now. So those two things are really combined. And then even in 2 states that have successfully passed, New Mexico and Colorado, they included those provisions directly in their bills. And Vermont originally did this, but it was like dissected in committee, and then the incentive passed, school meals for all passed after that. But really they are quite intertwined. And so that's the policy. In advocacy, we saw this correlation and we wanted to investigate it further. So I'll share after this that we engaged in a case study series that looked into that advocacy and how states were passing school meals for all. And we found that farm to school was the common thread in a lot of these states. So that can be like the leaders of school meals for all policies were champions in farm to school. They use talking points that we just heard that shows that they support each other with the virtuous cycle of school meals and further support the agricultural economy. And then that really resulted, like using farm to school within those platforms, it brought in coalition membership, it brought in the base of bipartisan support specifically with farmers and parents. And it really spoke to conservative legislators, which are prevalent in all states and especially in New York. Ways that we've seen that being done, and I think we'll hear more about this later, is in that rhetoric, in those talking points and one-pagers and graphics, which we'll share after this and talk about more. In like campaigns, Michaela might talk about the This Farm Feeds New York Kids campaign, in op-eds by farmers and farmer testimony at hearings, I think is really important. And then lastly, there's a lot of like lunch and learns with legislators at schools that feature local food. So that's a great way to show that combined impact of those programs. Yeah, so to wrap it up, I think it's pretty common, and I think it's great that New York is really taking this on too.
Can I ask you a few more questions about what you said? First of all,
Yeah.
you talked about the virtuous cycle. For those who are less familiar with that term, what do you mean by that, I guess?
Yeah, so the virtuous cycle basically shows that School Meals for All increases access to school meals, but with the infusion of local food purchasing and similar policies, that helps support the access, helps support the quality of those school meals. And if school meals are more nutritious, there's more scratch cooking, participation further increases, and those dollars go to the local food economy. And further increases participation in school meals. So really, it just ends up benefiting students and farmers in this cycle of increased access and meal quality.
That's perfect. Thanks. What I really liked about what you said was that, I mean, from a policy nerd perspective, like that there are these reinforcing clusters that like good policy begets more good policy. And I think that that's such an important takeaway because there is this longstanding perception often that there's anti-hunger issues and then there's food quality issues, and these are two separate, sometimes competing, efforts. And I think that, frankly, your research shows that they're not. It's not a zero-sum game. That actually all child nutrition advocates should be working on, the strong efforts to improve school meals, whether that's through funding and increasing access or increasing quality. So that was really exciting to see. And obviously we'll share more of those case studies out through the links later, but thank you so much. So Michaela, you and Krista are still heavily involved in active advocacy efforts. And with that context from other states, can you explain here how New York advocates are choosing to work together right now?
Sure. So like I mentioned, we have our two separate coalitions, but a lot of the members of New York Grown Food for New York Kids coalition are members of the Healthy School Meals for All campaign and vice versa. So we respect that and we work side by side. And so lead advocates from Hunger Solutions, as well as myself and some of my colleagues at AFT, we have monthly meetings to just update each other on what we're hearing in Albany, what our coalitions are saying, and how can we help each other advance our efforts in a way that doesn't minimize either of our goals. And so this has been really fun. Cassandra named one-pagers, graphics, we've gotten into comms a little bit, and it's always just a joy to have these monthly meetings. But I will say that it's helpful for me in leading the coalition to keep in mind that good policy is born out of collaboration. And we see, even with the history of school meals, if anyone ever wants to get really in-depth history of school meals, it's very fun. The book Labor of Lunch I would highly recommend it. Maybe some of you have read it, probably, given the audience here. But you can see that we've had a long history in school meals of collaboration, of multiple groups from multiple backgrounds coming together and saying, hey, we want to feed our kids and we want to feed all of our kids. And all of our kids are not being fed the same. There's inequity issues. And so I see this collaboration between our two coalitions as an extension of that. And I hope that someday in the future, when every child in the state of New York, regardless of who they are or what their parents' household income is, has access to culturally relevant local meals and they don't have to pay for it, that's the vision, that someone will say, wow, this Farmland Trust came together with Hunger Solutions New York and coalitions from, over 200 partners from across the state, across both of our coalitions, have come together, all experts in what they do, every single person an expert in what they do, and have decided that this is how we want to see the future of school meals move forward. That's pretty special.
So I think in any long-standing, like strong relationship, there is some tension. And so I'm wondering, Krista, if you can talk a little bit about, what have been the challenges of working in the two coalitions and what has ended up working well?
Sure. So I think the piece that Michaela touched on earlier, that our coalitions are intentionally separate. There's a reason for that. We have a really diverse coalition on the Healthy School Meals for All front. We've got more than 290 organizations at this point, and the reason we're able to bring all of those partners together is that we're coming together around one simple ask that we all agree on. And we realized very early on in conversations with our coalition members that we couldn't muddy that water with any additions, no matter how sort of natural of a fit it seemed to us as coalition leaders. Many of the groups that are part of our coalition have policy agendas that are approved by their members, they're approved by their board, and they need to stick to those policy agendas. If there's anything added to what our coalition is asking for, they would likely have to drop off, even though they remain supportive of healthy school meals for all. So that, I think, has been the primary challenge, is how do you bridge that gap when we can't necessarily join these two policies together or join these two asks together and approach it as one coalition. But I think, Michaela has touched on a number of ways that we've been able to thread that needle and still work side by side. So we're at each other's advocacy days. The partners from our coalition who can join the other coalition will do so, and vice versa. And we're, writing memos of support for each other's asks. We found a number of ways to be very supportive of each other's work while still respecting the boundaries of the coalition members.
Michaela, you also, anything to add on that, since you're part two of this two-part coalition?
Sure. Yeah, there are definitely challenges. It's not like we all have come together and it's kumbaya. And a lot of the challenges that we face for Farm to School are actually, I would say, within our own coalition and not necessarily externally. And I see many coalition members on the call today too, so maybe they can attest from experience, but that's bound to happen when you have people who are very passionate about supporting farmers and agriculture in New York State come together with people who are every single day working in a cafeteria trying to get kids fed, or you have community organizations with maybe a slightly different mission, or you have producers who are actually making products that they could sell to schools. It's just so diverse, this coalition. And so the challenge really has been taking this policy that we have that we know is not working for schools and could be doing better for farmers, and saying, okay, everyone, what is the vision here? What changes could we make? What are the challenges you're facing? And we hear them all the time. And we take those, and then the challenge for us at AFT is to then translate that into a message for legislators that we have established relationships with at the state level, and also figure out how to get these challenges, how to make them heard in a way that's palatable to legislators. And honestly, policy change is slow. It's very slow, and it's slow because we have to establish trust within the coalition. And it's slow because legislators have so many competing priorities. And to be frank, Farm to School isn't always one of the highest items on the agenda. In New York, we have a lot of other issues like housing, for example, and other things that is taking up the space in Albany. So we just really, those are some of the challenges that we try to overcome, and obviously partnering together can help overcome those as well, especially with the relationship building piece in Albany.
Great, thanks. So Cassandra, you've been deeply involved with the New York efforts. You've been advising on farm to school policy with AFT, and also providing communication support to the Healthy School Meals for All campaign. I'm wondering, what experiences or learnings from New York do you think could help advocates in other states?
Yeah, and I think I'll first say that I'm just really grateful to be at the table with these two different coalition leaders and be part of that conversation in my home state. So it's been really a wonderful experience. I feel like the message for today is strong collaboration, but what that actually means is in other states that could be just attending other coalition meetings. We support a coalition in Arizona, and they had the Farm to School Network come and just present on the history of Farm to School, so that the folks at the School Meal Coalition understood a little bit more and there was more level ground. So there's definitely baby steps and a spectrum between that. I really like the open lines of communication that were already mentioned. So those monthly meetings are really key, just to talk about like, what is your bill doing? Who are you talking to? Who should we talk to? Like all of those things are really important and impactful. And I'm really grateful to be part of those meetings.
I actually have a clarification question on that because I realized I
Yeah.
don't, is it steering committee members or just the coalition leads who are in those monthly meetings? Like how big is that? Because I think the tension in a coalition often is that what Michaela touched on, like you have so many competing, and so you have to narrow the focus sometimes, or the number of people in a meeting just to get something done. And I'm curious, like, what's the right number? Is it like that? What's the Amazon rule? Like no more than who can eat one pizza or something like that?
It's about 5 and then me, so 6, sometimes 5. I think that's a good number to keep it not too many conflicting viewpoints and just more updates and insight from the steering committee leaders, I'd say. So that's the special ingredient, that number there. Another tip I have is just like recognizing that we all have the same goals. So that's definitely been mentioned here about just investing in school meals is the vision. And so there's many different ways to do that. They don't all have to happen at the same time. So that's another recommendation I have. I was speaking to a farm to school advocate, and she said like, oh, I don't want to participate in school meals for all in my state because they're not doing an incentive bill as part of it. And I said like, that's okay. While it does happen, it's actually pretty rare that those two are combined. So I like that New York is keeping those two coalitions and those asks separate. There's definitely pros and cons to that approach, but I think it's okay to have them working on their own time in their own space and then come together when it's needed. And that even if it's separate, I think having support from both sides at different times is key. And then the last thing I would say is to not reinvent the wheel. So there's been a lot of borrowing in New York from other states. AFT has a great graphic they've adapted from Michigan that shows like investment in the incentive and investment in school meals culminates in the greatest investment in the community for farmers and for students. So we can share that out later. I mentioned borrowing the tactic of this farm feeds New York or Vermont kids. That was really great. And then also I'd say to other advocates, like looking at the one-pagers from New York on both sides, both of these coalitions have developed great talking points. I would just suggest to look at those, do a lot of cross-state collaboration, ask those questions, and don't feel afraid to reinvent the wheel. Or yeah, don't reinvent the wheel. Don't be afraid to borrow because it's working here, and that's great.
Great, and Cassandra, because we have you, I can't help but ask, you had mentioned when we were talking ahead of this call that we said we weren't going to get too much into the specifics of like what New York's farm to school policy was or what our healthy school meal policies were, because they look very different across the country. And we want this to be applicable not just in New York, but to the other people joining us from outside New York. But I can't help but say, I think our healthy school meals for all policy you said has actually been a model maybe for states that we wouldn't have expected, and that you as a farm to school advocate already have entry into that, and so you've been able to like broach that message. And could you, I'm being vague because you are very specific, so can you talk a little bit more about that? I thought that was so interesting.
Yeah, are you talking about like the different pathways to increase school meal access to eventually get to school meals for all?
I think you said that like in many states, a full universal school meals for all, which is what we want in New York State, but we don't yet have, is intimidating in states that are maybe more conservative, right? And that in red-leaning states that full universal maybe doesn't feel tenable. But our CEP subsidy, so if you could explain a little bit about what a CEP subsidy is, but our CEP subsidy actually may be more of more interest to people in those states, and that as a farm to school person, you can be the one to sort of introduce that idea that you're seeing here in New York, elsewhere in states, for instance, in like the Southeast, where that option might be the right one.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's incremental ways to increase access to school meals. The first, and I think simplest that we're seeing in, I wish I knew the exact number, but quite a few, and some states that now have full-blown school meals for all policies, they eliminated the reduced price lunch category. So that's a specific income bracket. A family that makes under a certain amount will have free school meals. And then there's another bracket where it's in between, sort of like the lower middle class, so to speak, would have reduced price lunches, which are, roughly 40 cents per lunch for students. And then there's the paid meal category. So a lot of states are just eliminating the reduced price lunch category that has a lower price tag, and is definitely will impact a lot of students, and it gets the foot in the door for school meals for all. And then there's another way to increase those threshold limits for who qualifies for free meals. New Jersey just passed the Working Class Families Act, or something similar to that we can share. And so that is exactly that. It increases who is allowed to qualify for free meals, and then the state will supplement what's not covered by the federal government. In New York, there's a CEP subsidy where schools that participate in the community eligibility provision, which basically gives it gives specific communities that are more economically challenged, economically diverse, more funding to support their school meal programs, such that they can have a universal meals program at the school level or at the district level. So that's an isolated school meals for all policy. But the issue with the federal program is that in a lot of cases, it doesn't actually cover all the costs of a school meal program. So a lot of schools just don't participate in it, even though they can have universal meals, because there's still that gap, right? It's not financially feasible for them to do that. So New York, they're just providing that funding to fill the gap between what CEP from the federal government covers and what doesn't. So that is, yet another way that advocates can continue to increase access to school meals, which might be, as you mentioned, more favorable in different conservative leaning states. Hope that wasn't too wonky.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's no way to talk about community eligibility provision without being wonky. So thank you. Yeah, and when you had said that, as someone who already has credibility, because farm to school has credibility in those states already, being the person to be able to introduce these sort of incremental steps towards healthy school meals for all, I thought was so interesting. So, and I also just thought it's funny, often when New York passes a policy, we like to be big and bold, and we think that, maybe California will pass one if they haven't already. And it's really cool to hear that actually in this case, our bill might be something that states that we're not usually in the same sort of groupings with might be interested in these. And, Krista, I can't help but say, obviously, we're still going for hoping for full school meals for all. That's great. So before we turn to audience questions, I just wanted to go back to Michaela, Krista, and Cassandra and say, are there any final thoughts you'd like to share?
Yeah, I have a few. We talked a lot about, the coalitions and collaboration today, but I just want to add that there's a few other programs we have in New York that really make farm to school more possible that we haven't touched on. One is New York has a farm to school coordinator program housed out of Cornell Cooperative Extension. Many of the coordinators are on the call today. So shout out to the coordinators who work tirelessly across the state to physically be in schools, helping them to make those connections to farmers, helping them to purchase more local foods and figure it out, because someone wrote it in the chat earlier, but it is not like a food service director just meets a farmer, down the road and is like, I'd like to buy some carrots, and then, the carrots are in the meals. It's not that simple. I wish it was. But it takes a lot of time to establish connections with farmers for the processing, for the transportation, for aggregation. I could go on, but coordinators reduce that burden a little bit and are really making farm to school possible. And they are partially funded through the state budget. So there's an idea for other states. And then I also want to add, we haven't touched on the diversity of New York. much. But, New York City Queens is the most diverse area, I think, in the world still. And then, you have New York City, and then we have very rural areas that are more upstate. If a child lives in an agricultural community or even on a farm, I grew up on a farm, that doesn't mean that they have access to food. Their farm might be producing hay or maple syrup. And as much as kids love to eat just maple syrup, you can't. That's me speaking from experience. So this is really important, and also culturally relevant meals are important. And so we at Farm to Institution New York State have another program that we collaborate on, which trains producers who are interested in using K through 12 schools as a market opportunity. So these are producer trainings, independent of policy, but farmers can go through this program and learn how to work with schools in a way that feels good to schools and is easier for food service directors. So programs like that also complement policies and help to ensure the supply chain is working for everyone.
I'll just add, I appreciate that Michaela brought up all of the staff resources and connections that are required to make farm to school work. It's something that we've been thinking about a lot because, on today's call, we're among friends in the food policy space who you may naturally see why these two policies go together. My advice to folks in other states is do not assume that anybody outside of this world will get that. I think we really need to paint a picture of what this means in schools. And I will just give a shout out to all of the food service directors who have been part of our coalition, who've been supporting this effort, and who've been able to tell their stories that without universal school meals, their staff resources are being used on administrative burdens like calling families and chasing down school meal debt that families can't afford to pay. And once you lift that burden and you have a school meals policy that offers free meals to all students, those staff resources can be redirected to exploring farm to school, making those connections with producers, taste testing items with students, right? All of those pieces that go into a successful program. So there's nothing more impactful from my perspective than having a food service director, be able to share that narrative and explain on the ground, what does this mean for them to have these two pieces brought together? And then I'll just say too, I'm happy to be a resource if folks in other states are trying to figure this out. I think today's call is a really important way to start that conversation, but just want to say that too. If there's coalition leaders from other places who want to have a one-on-one conversation, explore this topic further and learn more, get into more of the weeds, to feel free to see all of us as resources in that.
Yeah. Thanks, Krista. I definitely agree. Feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to explain CEP to anybody on the call. It's a recurring theme in my life. I'll add two more things. One is Michaela spoke about the investment in farm to school coordinators, and that it's not that easy. It doesn't just happen overnight. I would say that for state advocates, it's really also important to think about investing in building up infrastructure and staff training and all of those other things that come with school meals for all. Like Practice released a report last week or earlier this week that school meal participation skyrockets when all kids can eat school meals for free. There's no stigma anymore, and it just becomes part of the culture. And what that means is longer lines. It means more staff. It means equipment is being strained. And if we want to promote scratch cooking, California did a really great job at also at the same time of having school meals for all, including things like kitchen infrastructure and training grants as well. So just something to know that, yeah, farm to school is not easy, and school meals for all also won't be easy and will take some growing pains as well, and more investment in those other pieces, not just funding meals. And then one other thing we didn't talk about is I've heard from some states and also in New York that once school meals for all is funded, there's the question, like, do we still need farm to school funding? And that's something I don't know if we're really like fully fleshed out with the talking points as of right now, but I think it's important to just say, like, yes, get out there ahead of time and understand that even though there is more capacity to serve local food, there's more time, as Krista mentioned, there's not those chasing around meal debt situations anymore. There's a lot, like Michaela said, about serving local food, sourcing local food, and all of those other components that really does require both investments at the same time. It's not just one or the other.
Thank you all. And Cassandra, so cool to hear you talk about scratch cooking, because I feel like, you know, at New York Health Foundation, we fund some scratch cooking pilots and also an initiative in New York's City Department of Education. And I feel like 5 years ago, pre-COVID, people looked at us like we were total crazies. And I wasn't here, but still working on the child nutrition work. And now I think with, you know, with the developments with Healthy School Meals for All and with the longstanding commitment to farm to school, the marriage between the two seems much more obvious and feels way less out there, frankly. And so we're hearing that in conversation more, and I hope that continues. We do have lots of questions in the chat, and I will say I'm never good at multitasking, but here I go. So first question, and whomever feels like taking it, great. So in the 2023-2024 New York State budget, it was 229 billion, I believe. So many zeros, hard to read. Have you ever seen what the actual percentage of the state budget is spent on fighting hunger in New York versus other priorities?
So we haven't done this exact analysis, but I'll just share that our ask for universal school meals is less than 0.1% of the state budget. And that seems to be well understood by lawmakers, that this is a very modest and really impactful investment.
And I would say with the creation of the Child Poverty Task Force in New York State, which was, you know, codified by the governor, that seems like, if it's such a small percentage of the state budget, an easy policy fix to address childhood poverty. So with the caveat that, you know, at New York Health Foundation, we support advocacy and we do not support lobbying, but there is a question here: are there specific bill numbers or programs that interested parties should be asking the legislators to support? I think maybe sending them to your websites, possibly.
Yes, we'll send you to the website and the follow-up, or you can email me directly and I'll drop my email in the chat as well.
Great, but there are active bills for both, right? Great. Keep going. Oh, here's a question. So, you know, the food that kids are getting in school sounds so important. Are there programs to include postpartum mothers where they can be getting access to local or quality foods?
Well, maybe I'll just use this as an opportunity to plug the WIC program, which we also work on here at Hunger Solutions New York, for, you know, pregnant, postpartum people, kids under 5 who meet income qualifications, and provides really robust benefits, from nutrition education to a prescription of healthy food items, and also has a farmers market nutrition program component as well. So certainly, you know, we're always, in our work with schools and with other partners, encouraging outreach for WIC as well as the SNAP program, to make sure that the whole family is taken care of. So I'll be sure to include some of the resources on WIC outreach and additional information about the farmers market program as well in the follow-up.
And I will say, while there aren't explicit farm to school programs for postpartum mothers at this point, like you said, there's the farmers market nutrition program through WIC. And there are also pilots across New York State around farm to early childhood care that are currently up. So haven't quite gotten to the mother, but moving, you know, to younger ages at least. Okay, another question. I think this is for you, Michaela, when you were talking about the other farm to school programming. Someone said, can you kindly share the name of the program again? And I believe this was maybe the farmer outreach work you were doing to help with farm to school. But anyway, if you could name sort of like how someone would find out more information on the regional, the 3 programs you mentioned, basically.
Okay, so yes, AFT has a collaborative initiative called Farm to Institution New York State. We pronounce it Finesse. And so the link I shared in the chat, finesse.org, will have all of the information about all of our programs. And the programs I mentioned are our finesse programs.
Great. Another question from the audience. Are there any school districts that are incorporating traditional local indigenous foods into their programs to support the healing benefits of traditional foods for indigenous students? This person is writing from the Comox Valley, I think in British Columbia, and works on truth and reconciliation actions and hoping to figure out ways to incorporate more traditional local foods.
Yes, here in New York, that is happening. In New York State, we have 8 federally recognized tribes, but that doesn't include all of the tribes that we have. Some are not recognized by the state still. So that's a separate issue, but I know that there have been pilot projects on Long Island, and we have connected with them. And then there was also at some point, I believe, a bison project, maybe closer to Rochester, but we can, a Google search will help you find those smaller projects that are doing that work.
Great, and I know that USDA is also looking to support more work through farm to school and indigenous communities. They also have a bison project out of the Midwest that they're pursuing. So it's increasingly happening, but I think that it is harder than it should be to find out information about where and who, and then to be able to replicate. So very, very important question. And thank you for sharing.
Yeah, I can add
okay.
on to it really quick. So that is not necessarily my department at National Farm to School Network, but we do a lot of work with culturally relevant meals and indigenous communities. So feel free to email me and I can put you in touch with the person who does that work. And from a policy perspective, New Mexico has a very strong and robust incentive program that has provisions for culturally relevant school meals. And they have a high percentage of indigenous folks in their state. So that's also a program to look to. It's called the New Mexico Grown Program. And it was so successful that it's recently increased to early childhood care and education sites and even elder care and senior sites too.
Great. That actually is a perfect segue into the next question. So just can someone talk a little bit more about what work like Farm to School is doing to link to culturally appropriate meals? If you have examples in New York, great. If not, can we talk more globally?
Yes, we have so many examples in New York. So another finesse program is we run the the New York Farm to School Institute. And so that is a professional training opportunity for folks who are working in schools and want to incorporate more farm to school programs, maybe outside of just procurement, like school gardens or meet and greets with farmers, a harvest of the month, all sorts of really fun activities that connect students to their food system. And through the schools we've worked with in this program, and I believe applications are open, but maybe Stephanie or Ashley can correct me in the chat. But through the schools we've worked with, we have seen a lot of examples of schools working really hard to connect with farmers who are growing foods that are more familiar to their students or more representative of their specific student demographics. One example of a school that I coached here in New York City, out of Hell's Kitchen, they had a lot of Dominican students, and they had a Dominican farmer who grows in Connecticut involved with their farm to school program. And it was just inspirational for everyone. And, they were making all sorts of really fun foods. The kids loved it. So there's a lot of opportunity to be creative with culturally relevant meals here in this state.
I'd also give out a shout out to Buffalo, that I feel like Buffalo Public Schools is working with Good Food Buffalo and Food for the Spirit to really try and figure out how to get more food into the public school system that looks that is produced by BIPOC farmers. So on an ongoing process, but just a lot of energy there. Great. Another question, very technical. These are lots of questions, very exciting. Are there examples of connecting wellness policies to farm to school work, both in terms of cafeteria and gardening and farming? And Cassandra, that might be you, that might be Michaela, I'm not sure.
I would say that that's National Farm to School Network, but again, a different program manager at National Farm to School Network. So happy to connect via email, but I'm not necessarily sure I can speak to wellness policies right now.
Yeah, and another question, is there work being done on connecting school and community gardens to the cafeteria? If so, what integration strategies have been successful?
Yes, so much work being done there in New York, and I'm sure Cassandra can point you all to, you know, resources in other states as well. If you are in New York and you're asking specifically about New York, I would again recommend visiting the finesse.org website. The Farm to School Institute helps bridge those connections and has a network of alumni schools across the state who have already done a lot of work and have gotten really creative with how to incorporate their school garden and get that food into the cafeteria or do fun community events or taste tests. So definitely I would recommend visiting the finesse.org website and reaching out to that program, those program staff.
Great, and I'll also add that another New York Health Foundation grantee is the Tisch Food Center, and their Food Ed Coalition had been tracking what food and nutrition educators were working with cafeteria connections and school gardens. So they have a database that looks at that, at least in New York City. Okay, another question, they keep coming in. Is there any conversation happening in interactions with state policymakers? This is a tricky one, sorry. Where the state could use all of the financial information gathered during filing for state taxes during tax season to automatically qualify and enroll families in public hunger programs. So basically, like, are we looking at linking SNAP, WIC, Medicaid, school meals applications? And Krista, I think that one's for you.
Sure. Yeah, this is an interesting idea. I don't think that I've heard any conversations in the legislature about this specific concept of state tax filings being used for auto enrollment. But what is being talked about is data matching across programs. So there's what's called adjunctive eligibility, right, or automatic eligibility across many of these programs. If you participate in one, you may automatically qualify for the other. So one example is if you participate in SNAP and you're otherwise eligible for WIC, you get automatic qualification through SNAP. So the state is working on an integrated eligibility system that would bring all of these pieces together for some data matching, at the very least for outreach and enrollment where possible. And a lot of nonprofit partners who work on these programs are also trying to bridge those gaps in any way that we possibly can. So lots of good conversation and work happening in this area.
Great. Since we're almost at time, I'll just say, if you have any closing remarks from the speakers, we'd love to hear it now. And then I'll just sort of do a quick recap. Nothing we missed.
No, I'll say something. I read in the chat, someone said that they're from a CEP school in New York, and that a lot of the most recent CEPs, the schools that came on to CEP, the community eligibility provision, because of the new expanded school meal access in New York, are now focusing on farm to school. And that's something that we touched on a little bit, but it's in our other talking points, is that when a school has school meals for all, they have the capacity, as Krista mentioned, to do more local food. And the proof is in the pudding. We've seen that, I think it's like over 80% of schools that participate in the 30% initiative are CEP in some way. And, you know, some of those are impacted by the funding that we mentioned at the top of this call, but that's a huge percent. So just to see that CEP schools with universal meals at the school or district level have the capacity, I think is something to celebrate and really explore further.
Thanks, Cassandra. I think that also, it gets back to a question that was in the chat that we didn't have time for, that said, you know, what are the thoughts on policy evaluation, giving overlapping but distinct policies that are being implemented in states? And I think that, you know, from a policy perspective, it speaks to the need to capture this data as it's happening, you know, what's happening to farm to school, the anecdotal comments that we're hearing in the chat are really helpful, but funders like myself and across states should be thinking about supporting grantees to capture data to show that these are mutually reinforcing policies, right? So I think, the more thoughtful we all can be about that as healthy school meals for all hopefully continue to roll out across states, the better data we'll have to continue advocating for these kind of work. We're very close to time. I'm going to say thank you all for really active participation in the chat. We had so many good comments, really great questions, and I want to give a big thank you to our speakers for their time today and for their time every day on the work that they're doing to make sure that New York students are fed. It's so important. We'll be sharing a recap with the link to the recording and the other materials following this event. And thank you all again for joining. So really appreciate it.